All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Optimizing Live. I'm Richard Dolman, and I'm, as always, thrilled to be joined with my colleagues Randy Hale and Dan Graham.
Hey, Richard.
So today we're going to continue our conversation around, optimizing AI for organizations. Our kind of collective title for today's episode is around, pilots to payoff and then cracking the AI adoption code. We've been talking about AI adoption for a while now, and we started with doing some initial survey, checking in with the market on what was blocking organizations with their AI adoption initiatives. And as we learned about that, we also started talking about, well, what are the real value or impact drivers that organizations are going after? And we find this to be a really compelling conversation, and we've built a workshop around this topic. So today we're going to explore that a little bit more. Before we jump in, I do want to essentially set the context or frame this conversation up a little bit. And for me, in the conversations I have with people, sometimes when we just say AI, that can be a very kind of large, nebulous definition. So I think it's important that we kind of set the context for what we're talking about with AI. And specifically, we're talking about what's called generative AI. And generative AI is essentially a type of AI that has the ability to create new or original content. That could be software code, that could be visual content, videos, voice content, etc. And so I think generative AI is unique from other forms of AI, but this is probably the most popular movement that's going on right now that organizations are seeing. And I think this idea of creating something new that makes generative AI both kind of risky and challenging for organizations, but also offers up immense opportunity for organizations and leaders. So as I mentioned earlier, we started off months ago by doing a survey and trying to find out what are the blockers that individuals and organizations are experiencing. And in our simple survey, what we found was predominantly it was the main blocker was overly complex or burdensome governance. That a lot of people felt that their organizational governance was just too restrictive, too much friction, too many politics to have to get through. The next highest voted blocker was around a lack of aligned AI strategy, which makes sense because it's new, it's evolving, it's moving very rapidly. So some organizations are jumping in, but maybe they kind of lack a well thought out strategy, or maybe they just haven't communicated that strategy very well. The third blocker that really resonates with me is around essentially talent and capabilities gaps. Is that how do we get our workforce, our individual contributors, our managers, our leaders, how do we get everybody educated, up-leveled on AI? And again, specifically what we're talking about is generative AI. So I think these are very common blockers that we were seeing. And this has been supported in other research and other data that I've looked at. There was a economist impact report that came out earlier in the year that really validated some of this. What they were saying was only about 37% of executives believe that their generative AI is production ready. That number is lower. It's all the way down to 29% for individual contributors. So there's not a high level of confidence within organizations that the things that they're doing relative to Gen AI are actually production worthy, which tells me that they're thinking of it either as just some experimentation, or they've got pilots that haven't scaled yet. So it's still very much promising, but not quite hitting the mark. And to cap this off, that report goes on to really say that the key constraints that were cited in the report included governance, as I mentioned earlier, 33%, included data quality and security at 37%, and then capabilities and skills at 40%. So that's just reassuring to me. That tells me that, we're onto something here when we started exploring this topic, and not really approaching it from a pure technical perspective, but approaching it from a human and an organizational perspective, and what that means for organizations as they start going down this path with AI. So I found that kind of interesting, that these blockers, while not terribly surprising to me, are proving to be real impediments for organizations going from, well, we're going to experiment over here in this corner, to really getting things that are production worthy.
Let me try to give some context to the overview of, the AI and the value, and really why this matters. Taking a step back, we are in a huge transition right now from what I call, the digital age into the thinking age. And I think this will have profound impact on our lives, our businesses, and how we conduct ourselves to create productivity. So framing this up of why it matters is, AI isn't one initiative. It's a multiplier across productivity, decision quality, and speed. The goal is moving from experiments to enterprise value. As an organization, you have various tools to support the work product that you're putting out as a part of your business. On one side, this is a potential tool upgrade to make your organization more efficient, have it communicate more crisply, and create additional productivity, so your staff and your organization can focus in on the human elements. We often say human in the middle. AI is really a tool set that you can apply and deploy within your organization, really for productivity and efficiency that frees up human focus. Also for decision intelligence, getting to faster, better decisions. And it can also improve your customer experience, making that more personalized and engaging. And so the draw of AI is around productivity and concentrating your staff to focus in on those human aspects, the relationships, the network, those experiences. But by taking a lot of the rote work that you do, or the information you're looking for to simulate into communications, and providing tools and the ability to execute against those steps, so you can concentrate more in on the human aspect of the work product. So taking a step back again, these are on one level considered an IT upgrade of your tool set, but on another level, it is improving communication efficiency by instrumenting your internal data and your internal tools, and making those accessible and available to downstream AI applications or services. You can increase velocity of your business. You can decrease costs of your business. You can get to better decisions faster by using these tools. However, this isn't just an IT upgrade, as in it's just something that IT grabs tools and rolls out to their employees. This really affects all parts of your organization, your culture, how people interact with one another, how they actually do their job on a day-to-day basis. So starting that transition, a lot of organizations really start with experiments and trying to do key learnings around AI tools. What we found out that those experiments often fail, which isn't necessarily bad because you can learn from those, but what we've realized is this transformation takes a more concentrated approach. It involves and requires executive leadership, visioning, buy-in, and a plan to implement and measure that implementation and correct where your metrics may be off from what you expect. And so the workshop series is really designed as a framework to take an organization through a process to identify your vision, look at your data security and governance, understand your people's capabilities and how to advance those around these tool sets, around this new thinking, around kind of maybe even a cultural change on how you go about doing your day-to-day business. And so it's good to baseline where you are as an as-is state. It's good to envision a to-be state, understand the metrics and the path that you want to get to there, and methodically measure an implementation of that vision. Impact requires aligning objectives, data, governance, adoption, and the workshop gets into a methodology to execute against that.
Yeah, Dan, I'm curious to get your additional thought. This idea of having clarity around the value that organizations are trying to create. I think there's a quick response to say, well, we need more productivity or we need more efficiency. But one of the things that I'm learning is that the classic, let's say, ROI, return on investment definitions that might existed for earlier digital transformations, for example, we may be looking at something different now. So how we define value, how do we define ROI may be different with AI, generative AI particularly, than, let's say, with other forms of transformation. What do you think?
Yeah. That's a really good question, Richard. The typical ROI calculation of, let's say, a new tool is fairly well understood in the enterprise environment. There is certainly that with an AI transformation. It can certainly save you cost in tooling, but let me get into some of the areas that aren't necessarily apparent on what to measure, because a lot of these, let's call them KPIs for your business, are bespoke for your organization. It's not just a cost ROI of a new tool, it's an understanding of what's the value to get to the data that you need faster. What is the value of making better decisions based off of that data? What is the value of increasing the fabric and the communication of your teams through these tools? Some of these are incalculable unless you really look at what your objective is, and understanding your as-is state, understanding the desired to-be state, and coming up with the specific metrics to measure the value of that transformation. And part of the workshop goes into how do you derive those KPIs, where do you source the data for that, and honestly, how do you automate the calculation of these ROIs? And we go into great detail through our workshop to bottom out on what those are, as well as structurally, how do you track those? A lot of this comes in the form of a governance committee that is sponsored by an executive, where these are proactively stated through this workshop process, or internally deriving these KPIs, and then having a way to measure the impact, monitor that impact, make adjustments. A lot of these metrics can be wired up real time, so you can understand. Look, I remember, doing, a governance committee that measured progress of a program. Meeting once a month, you would be able to get the snapshot of what you were doing in the previous month at that time, make decisions on how to correct, and then another month would go by and you would have that same opportunity. What we're talking about is the ability to correct daily, hourly, minute by minute with some of these KPIs. So as you affect changes in your organizations, can see the results of that in near real time and make informed decisions around that. That paradigm has not existed easily within the enterprise environment to date. What value does that create for an organization? It's true agility against your entire business, and that value is sometimes incalculable. One thing to mention is, as an organization, you have to understand there are other organizations sprouting up in as native AI companies that have this as a part of their DNA, have these tools and have these capabilities from day one. And so they are coming for your business. They can do it faster, cheaper, better if they have as much insight into the market segment as you do. So your competition is growing. You want to create your own moat against those AI native startups by outbeating them with the same set of tools and the same methodology and adopting the same culture in order to be able to service your customers as well as a potential native AI upstart.
Yeah. And I want to call out, so Sunny put a comment/question here that I think speaks to that, and either one of you can respond. It's a big question to answer concisely here, but I think the point being is, yeah, how do organizations communicate and learn from these experiments, whether they're failures or successes, given that rapid pace that we're looking at?
That another very good question. So this is not an easy process to go through. I have a number of friends at organization and other examples of starting down this path and kind of hitting a brick wall. As in, starting, maybe your board has noticed the value of artificial intelligence and is pressuring the executive team to start down this path and frankly start throwing different experiments up against the wall to see how they do. You often run into the 80-20 rule here, where 80% of them don't move the business, and you might find 20% that show some value. That's an okay process to go through in order to start down this journey. But often, because of the high failure rates, and frankly, a lot of time these projects are layered on top of what everybody already has to do in their goals for the year or their workload. So there's not as good of a concentration and in-depth approach to this. What we're advocating here is that you take a step back from those experiments, learn what you can from them, and then reapply a methodology for the adoption of artificial intelligence, namely through the workshops that we provide in the consulting services behind those, to set a plan, communicate that plan, get buy-in from leadership on that plan, and have a governing board that measures and guides that implementation across your organization as a part of your yearly goals or objectives. Now, sometimes you need to surge with additional resources in order to get certain things done while you're doing business in the as-is state. And we certainly have consulting services for helping organizations do those surges. But at the end of the day, this takes a concentrated, structured approach to be successful.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to what Dan just said is normalizing sort of the crowdsourcing of your AI efforts and having the right kind of environment and structures in place to support like a community of practice type of a construct where you're not just running everything in silos across the organization and only sharing through like very structured mechanisms, but enabling people to just come together and have a conversation. It sounds so simple, but so many organizations ignore, these are people who have passion around these things, and how do we just create the environment where they can get together and talk and share. You're going to get a lot more rapid learning and being able to leverage the failures, as Sunny prompted in the question there, right? How do we prevent potentially dozens of people making the same mistake? Like the more rapidly we're having these feedback cycles and conversations, we can learn faster. I want to explore, why are we talking about generative AI at all? That might seem like a very obvious question, but let's start with why. Presumably, we want better business results. Why do we want better business results? Well, isn't that always the question of the day? I know the work that Dan, Richard, and I have done for the past at least dozen years in working with organizations on big strategic change efforts are all centered around that question of how do we improve performance? And I always like a good W. Edwards Deming quote, so let's pull one out for this conversation. Every system is perfectly designed to get the result that it does. And I cannot tell you how frequently in these strategic change conversations, the real awareness of the role that the system plays, and not just the awareness of the role that the system plays, but what do we mean by the system? That really becomes one of the big unlocks. And so the language that we use around this is operating model. And I know depending on where you sit in the organization, operating model might seem like, oh, like you must be talking to Bain or BCG or McKinsey if you're having an operating model conversation. A big part of our approach is we want to normalize that, no, you don't need to have like one of the big four strategy consultancies to be having an operating model conversation. How do we normalize that? How do we enable people all throughout the organization to participate in operating model kinds of conversations? Because if you want better results, you need a better operating model. Your current results are built on top of your current operating model. And so we think about that through three primary lenses, and there's different categories within each of those. But like your structures, how are you organized? Who reports to who? The performance measures that are connected to your structures. So who sits at the top of a function? How do you measure that individual as a leader? How do you manage their department? How do they manage their teams and their leaders? All of these things greatly influence how work gets done on a day in and day out basis. And frankly, what kind of trade-off decisions are being made? Because we have worked with a ton of Fortune 200 executive teams, as well as scale up teams. So, we kind of run the gamut. And one thing that has been a very consistent pattern is effective leaders know how they are measured, rewarded, and incented, and know how their department and their teams, and they show up in a way that they're advocating for their people and their team. The things that they're being measured on aren't always the right things to be optimizing for at the overarching umbrella level. And so how do we normalize those conversations? That's what we want to do, is, create greater empowerment throughout the organization to be able to question, where do we see something that might not be serving the greater good? The other piece of operating model is governance and decision rights. So, how do we evaluate certain strategic decisions? What are the trade-offs that we're considering? Who participates in those conversations? Who actually, at the end of the day, has the ability to make the decision? Is it an individual decision? Is it a group decision? All of these dynamics are really important. And so that's a core part of our approach. That's a core part of our Accelerating AI workshop, is how do we help you sort of see the system through that lens and be able to identify where are some things that might be in our way.
Yeah, and Randy, I think this is an area that's interesting to me because I think generative AI can both enable that discovery of what is at the core of our operating model and allow us to make decisions of what can be AI or machine managed and what still needs to be human managed. Mm-hmm. So Gen AI is both an enabler more so than the outcome, right? So it's quick to say, we need to adopt AI. We need AI for these reasons. But, generative AI particularly, I think will go a long way to help enable those conversations and that discovery to provide that clarity of saying, look, here, our operating model, it's the flywheel's turning. We can just turn that over to, quote, the machine, to the system. But these are the areas we need humans in the loop. This is where we need to really focus our people time so that we can be more creative and more productive. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of that, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Richard, we've talked about a lot. I want to demystify a little bit of this. I mean, this can feel like a daunting project or program to implement. And we've talked about a lot of different things and the value associated with that. But let me try to break this down as an example of the process that we've put together here in this workshop and how this is manageable and digestible. So really the AI Accelerator Workshop, if you distill this down, it's really the process to turn ideas into pilots. This is not a big lift and shift of your infrastructure. This is a process where you start to peel out certain workflows or functions and augment and or upgrade those with AI. So, shift from value acceleration to turning ideas into actionable pilots. So not necessarily rip and replace certain systems. You're talking about, reducing pain points. Some of this gives, fast, lean, measurable, strategic execution. But really, it's about identifying a core function as an as-is state, imagining how that evolves into a more automated process by layering on AI tools and piloting that and coming up with the measurable outputs of that. As you're implementing, you can check to make sure that you're on track to get that. So really identify value target. Where can AI drive measurable gains? Map the enablers. Do we have the data and the ownership clarity over that data? How do we quickly get to, a prototype? Test in, we're talking 2 to 3, 4 weeks, low risks, and then really measure and iterate the value of that implementation. Did we get the speed or the savings or the additional insights that we thought we would through implementing this workflow? Those are the ways that you can iterate through this transformation in a way that doesn't disrupt your existing business tools and process, but you can slowly layer on additional functionality, clarity, insight, and capabilities, and do that in a methodical way across your organization. Wash, rinse, and repeat.
Yeah, AI or agility lives in AI still. That's good to hear.
All right. Let's explore a little bit more on operating model. One of the things that we're really focused on is how do we help enable people in organizations to both see what's happening from an operating model perspective, see where there are elements that might be slowing the efforts with AI, and how do we enable people to actually influence the operating model? And one of the things that we really want to create is this empowerment dynamic, because again, the work we've been doing for 12 plus years, we're working with executive leaders on big strategic change efforts. I've even had conversations at the C level where you start to, bump up against something that's an operating model constraint. It can be really perceived as like, I don't have the keys to that. I can't unlock, that conversation. And if you have a C in front of your title and you don't have the ability to have an operating model conversation, then that probably begs some other lines of inquiry around how does that actually work. But regardless of your level in the organization, if you're an individual contributor on at the team level all the way up to the C-suite, we want to enable people to have more human conversations, not just look at the operating model as like, well, that's a capital C hard constraint. Like there's no conversation to be had there. We just have to go on to the next conversation. And how do we work around that constraint? The goal here is we want to take this human-centered approach to how does it feel to be part of this system? How does it feel to be charged with certain performance measures that, frankly, the system in many ways can feel like it's conspiring against you, right? It's like, I have these goals and the system is optimized for control or optimized for something that, feels like it's making my job harder than it needs to be. We want to be able to have those conversations and unlock those conversations among peers, different functions within the organization. And a big part of our approach is not leading with this, hardcore empirical logic focused problem that we're trying to solve. It's just like, how do we get all the arrows to work together better? We do want to start with this more human-centered conversation around how does it feel to work in this system, and how could this system better support what I'm trying to do as a leader, what my function's trying to do, what my team is trying to do. And the goal of this is we want to create the dynamic where many times we find that it's, this function against that function, right? It's the engineering organization against the sales organization, or the marketing organization, or the support organization against the engineering. Like there's all these, potential conflicts. We want to create the dynamic that says we all have different things that we're focused on and optimizing for. Where is our system in tension in a way that may not be optimal, that may not be as healthy as what is really possible? And how do we get those functions that could be competing against each other, depending on how you frame that conversation? How do we get them sitting on the same side of the table, looking at the system as the challenge? Like, how do we work together to help influence and shape improvements in our organizational system and in our operating model potentially, so that together we're delivering greater impact, faster time to market, greater customer value, that work flows. It feels like, we're able to respond to the demands upon us. We're able to respond to emerging demands. And so that's another part of what we've built out. On our website, we have a wait list for a couple of canvases that are, open source that we're creating to try and help facilitate these conversations. So if that's something of interest, like, we really think that there's a new angle there that can really help unlock some of those conversations.
Yeah, I want to bring in another comment on the link from a LinkedIn user. So what capabilities or roles are essential early on to guide ethical and compliant adoption? And I think this speaks to what Randy was just talking about, of how do we really start to have the conversations, get everybody at the table, and start to understand what are the implications of generative AI to us as an organization. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, because generative AI is unique in that it creates things, there's certainly questions around ethical use and questions around compliance. And, are we going to get in trouble because we used AI in a certain way or we created it? So I think the question of the capabilities and roles is a big question. Certainly, we need to be up-leveling, I think, everybody in the organization from top to bottom. And in saying that, we all need to learn different things depending on where we live in the organization. And so leadership might need to learn how to create that guidance for ethical and compliant use, and make sure that we're empowering the individual contributors to make choices and have a certain level of autonomy around this. So certainly there are going to be technical skills that need to be learned. I think largely what we're talking about is more the human side of adopting AI, not so much the coding side of it, but that's important. I'm not an engineer. I don't write code anymore, but I appreciate the need to improve those skills, whether it's the traditional software engineering or vibe coding or just understanding how to prompt a chat tool. But I do think, rather than answering the question up front, I think what needs to be done with organizations, they just need to sit down and be open of what are the friction points or the tensions that Randy mentions, right? So what are we grappling with? Where are we creating friction or tension in the organization? Because that can form waste, that can form, a lot of people digging their heels in, and can be a real blocker for you to make progress. So, I brought up agility earlier. The right time to start is certainly now, and you don't have to have all the answers up front, but take the steps you need to start getting people engaged and understanding, what are the capabilities we have? Where do we need to augment those capabilities? And I think focusing on guidance for ethical and compliant use is really important.
So Richard, one of the things, maybe even the elephant in the room, is around data security and governance. You really can't scale, without a well-articulated, secure, and the data governance around your organization. So, today is really about the value of acceleration as it associates with data. But you have to evolve your data, which really is at the heart of your business, and must be maintain security, especially as there's user data involved. This is like the critical elements of any organization. So part of our workshop puts data security and governance at the heart of this process. So, when we talk this through, we have a couple of different, focal areas, including data access and clarification. We talk about privacy and compliance. You're an organization that may need to maintain HIPAA compliant data security or GDPR security. There's also, model governance around lineage and drift of that data. And of course, there's security and incident response associated with that. And really the ethical element of how you share this data with AI, and what data you can share and what you can't. And so the workshop really gets at the heart of that. And going back to earlier sections, it really helps to have a well-articulated vision and buy-in from leadership, including your CTO or CIO, around data governance. But the idea is not to shy away from the governance piece here and the data strategy itself. Now, every organization is going to be bespoke on how they structure their data, what tools they use to manage, iterate through, and append that data, and how to extract that data and make good decisions off of that data. But there are very common elements that you need to maintain around security and governance. So the workshop really identifies what those data sets are, the underlying value that can be derived by sharing that data with downstream AI tools. But how do you govern that data? We're big advocates of a governance board that has a stated mission and objectives and a path to instrument their data for the use with AI, as well as measurable goals and maybe guardrails of how they want to treat that data. So again, this is something from the as-is state to the to-be state that can be done in steps that are measured, they're governed, and they're thoughtful in the approach with well-articulated ways to roll back steps in that process. And without that very concentrated and well-articulated data governance policy and approach with a way to measure and correct, a lot of these initiatives can get off kilter, or actually can expose data, or even some cases destroy data within your organization. So having a thoughtful and a method to address that data governance and security is, in my mind, paramount to the success of implementing artificial intelligence at an organization.
Yeah, there's so much there. I'm not a data specialist, but I know there's so much there that we're intending to dig into in the future. And so with that, I want to remind everybody, we've launched an initial workshop mainly to test the waters and to validate some of our hypothesis and get some feedback. But what we're really doing is we're building out a series of workshops and programs that we think will help organizations start to essentially crack that AI adoption code. And again, as that emerges, we're going to continue to learn things. We're going to get into the topics that Dan just talked about around data governance and data security. We'll get into other topics around what are the implications to our workforce. There was a great question in the comments there. I'll bring that up again. So what are the human skills that are going to need to be learned, improved, as AI starts to take on more of a role in our organizations? And, I think one of those is going to be critical thinking, right? We don't just put a prompt into ChatGPT, for example, and take its output for granted, or we shouldn't, right? So I think there's an opportunity for us to improve our critical thinking skills, our systems thinking skills as humans, so that what we're getting is an augmented experience, not a replace experience. AI, generative AI, has the ability to reason and predict, right? It's not sensing things the way we as humans sense them, at least not yet. So I think one of those critical skills that was referenced here in this question is that critical thinking, that system thinking. And I've seen examples of that throughout the organizations that I've worked with before AI came onto the scene, because most organizations are overburdened. There's just way too many competing priorities, and everybody's scrambling to get everything done. And so I think that critical thinking, that systems thinking, and again, going back to the ethical side of it, how do we build governance that adapts with the rapid change that we're facing. I have a belief that AI adoption is largely, again, for generative AI, is largely more about kind of a new era of change management and dealing with tensions and quote internal politics than what we've seen in the past. And so again, our workshop series is going to start to really explore all of these dimensions further as we go. So we'll be rolling out other elements of the series that will be covering data security and governance in depth. How do we bring new change management ideas into the organization? And certainly, how do we upskill, from individual contributors up to leaders, how to make smart choices about how to lean in and find ways for AI to augment their work and their productivity.
So let's explore what does it mean if we're optimizing for impact? What does optimizing for impact mean? Because that's ultimately what we're all about. Let's talk a little bit about our approach. Our approach is centered on 3 core focus areas. The first core focus area is on the role of leadership and the notion of catalyst leadership, which is focused on building the right environment where people are empowered, where the system is optimized so that the right things happen, whether I'm present or not as a leader, right? Understanding where do I have to be involved to help shape an outcome or make a strategic decision. But if I don't absolutely have to be there to make that happen, how do I enable the environment and the people to have greater autonomy and make the right things happen? So that's one element of our approach is making sure that we're focusing on that leadership dimension. The second dimension is strategic use of AI. And as I like to say, don't use AI to do the dumb stuff, or don't use AI to do the bare minimum that everybody should be using it for. What are your real opportunities? And looking at it through the lens of what are the specific use cases? Looking at, is this an automation opportunity? Is it a content creation opportunity? Is it data analysis? Is it ideation and strategy? Is it research, or is it coding? Those are the 6 use case primitives that OpenAI classified in their paper that came out, I want to say May or June of this year. And we really like that as a model to help create some grounding to not just saying AI, right, as this general umbrella, but or even generative AI, but getting really specific. What are the use cases? What are the opportunities? And finding that balance of where is the human AI interaction and what does good look like there, including change management considerations. So that's kind of one other large anchor to our approach. And then the third piece builds on the notion of, if you want better results, you need a better operating model. And it's what we refer to as adaptive operating model. And that is, it's not that there's one exact operating model. It's a quality of your operating model. Do you as an organization have the capability, this is an organizational capability. Do you have the capability to reflect on feedback, inspect what's happening, look at where your operating model is impeding what you're trying to accomplish, right? What's getting in the way of the impact that you're trying to create for your stakeholders, for your customers, as well as for your employees, and being able to operationalize on an ongoing basis some controlled number of new things that we're trying, that we're learning from, and we're going to shift and morph and adapt our operating model over time, versus the pattern that we've seen, in most organizations where In my career, like I've followed 6-month strategy engagements by Bain, like, literally at a Fortune 100 company. The first half of the afternoon was Bain doing their final presentation, and the afternoon was me saying, here's where we're going from here. We've seen that, and they do great work. And organizations have an opportunity to not need as much of that work and not have it be such a big bang kind of an effort. So that, based on our experience, that's something that we're adept in, and we've got approaches that really make baking that into how you work as an organization a core strategic capability and a differentiator.
Yeah, so as we get ready to wrap this up, I want to go ahead and share a little QR code here. We talked a lot about the workshop that we've been running, so we will shamelessly plug that as we close out here. So we have a workshop coming up, I think, in a little over a week on the 13th, and we've got another one scheduled for February. So if you're interested in joining the workshop, or if you have a colleague that might be interested, please feel free to share this with folks, because we do think this is just an opportunity to get in front of people and to have the conversation and to really explore the topic. So as we close, I'd like to get a kind of a closing comment from both Randy and Dan. I'll start with you, Dan. Do you have a kind of a closing comment you'd like to leave with folks?
Workshop is really designed to keep what we call a human in the middle. AI works best when humans stay in the loop, and they're not replaced, they're amplified. We take a crawl, walk, run approach to this, iterating through small initial steps for key learnings, patterns, and understanding, and build upon the success there. We design AI systems where people provide judgment, ethics, and context that the machines don't have. We think of the human in the middle. AI handles pattern recognition very well. It handles scale. But there's always this human that is directing these activities. This ensures accountability, keeps decision-making transparent, especially as you go from the crawl to the walk to the run. You want to have these patterns in place and the accountability around those patterns in place. The goal isn't full automation, not at all. It's augmenting the intelligence where humans provide the oversight and goals and direction, and the AI tools enhance those capabilities to perform your daily job function, to support your organization, but more importantly, to better service your customers.
My closing comment is going back to the whole notion of optimizing for impact and what we're all about and what we're trying to help enable in the world of work, which is whether you're an individual contributor, a middle manager, or an executive, look at the things you're doing on a day in, day out basis. Look at the things your team's doing, look at the things your broader function is doing. Do you see things that don't make sense, that feel like they're busy work, that feel like they're overhead, that feel like they don't add value? That's our focus, is to help you all see those things, bring them to the surface, build the awareness, and have new, different conversations than maybe you've ever had before in your organization around what does this mean and how can we all band together to make the system we work in better and more effective, and feel like when we come in and give our full day's work, that we didn't do a bunch of low value busy work, that we were actually maximizing our contributions and enabling greater impact throughout the organization. That's what we're all about. That's what we're trying to help enable in organizations.
So my final comment would be, I'll go a little bit old school, and don't limit your thinking about AI, generative AI specifically, as relegating it to an IT only thing, right? This is something that can change your entire organization, can create competitive advantage. And for me, I'll go back and just remind a couple of points that we covered in this talk, is that from a non-technical perspective, applying or adopting AI is really going to come down to, how do we rethink our organizational change management? How do we create a new version of that? And how do we navigate the tensions, the politics, the friction that exists trying to do new things within our organization? And as we rethink that, I think it gives us an opportunity to redefine what ROI means and what ROI through generative AI can look like. And so I hope everybody got a little bit of value from this. If this did resonate with you, feel free to look us up on LinkedIn, go to optimizingforimpact.com. And again, feel free to share the QR code or the link with any of your colleagues that might be interested. Once again, we appreciate you joining us for this episode of Optimizing Live. Randy, Dan, thank you both. And tune in for our next episode. And again, share your experiences with us. We love to learn from the community.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.